Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Are you kidding me? We're in October already. You know, Christmas is coming up, New Year's, all those New Year's resolutions and all that kind of stuff. So this month, try to do some simply snacking. You maybe pass it out for kids to give them a healthy alternative for Halloween. So anyways, enjoy October. Try to be good this month. You know what's coming, and just kind of try new stuff. Try the simply snacking beef and chicken flavors. There's a lot of good flavors out there. Maybe we'll get some extra ones for Thanksgiving next month. But thank you for listening. And again, thank you, Simply Snacking, for hosting this podcast. Hey, everyone. This is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice, because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Today's kind of cool because I have a local person who's really stepping up, kind of going into territory she doesn't want to go into. And, I think a lot of us can really identify. A lot of us try to stay out of politics and try to stay out of public life and try to just fly under the radar, but sometimes you get backed into a corner. So this is someone that I met recently, Amy Reichert, and she's running for supervisor here in San Diego. So this is a near and dear to my heart, because I saw patients and businesses go under, and drug abuse and alcohol abuse and all this stress that I deal with as a physician. So Amy, welcome. It's so great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Tell people your story that don't know, like what possessed you to get into politics? You seem like such a nice person.
2020 was the key that opened up my life, ironically, because of course we saw the lockdowns, but for me, it literally was my wake-up call. I have two kids, one who's older. He was in his senior year of San Diego State University, and he lost his senior year of college, all online. And then I have a younger son who was 9 years old at the time, and he was trapped in front of screens for months. And, I just saw how my friends started saying things like their kids were having mental health issues who had never had them before, or kids who had struggled with mental health issues, and it was only getting worse. And there was nobody there to help them. I live in La Mesa, and 2 miles from where I live, 3 buildings were burned down. And the reason why I bring that up is something happened that woke me up, and it was public health officials right here in San Diego went from just 2 weeks before, the beach will kill you and you're a selfish granny killer for wanting to go to the beach, to, oh, no. COVID is not spread by protesting or rioting. And that was my wake-up call. That's when I knew I had to start speaking out. And that's when there was this little Facebook group called Reopen San Diego. And we started meeting in person at a park. Our kids were able to play with other kids. They hadn't even seen other kids in months. And that's when we decided to do something.
Yeah, it was craziness. I remember seeing that, where I saw the parks were all caution taped off. They were putting sand into the skate parks, and all these kids were just kind of bottled up at home, not getting out, not engaging with other people. And one of the things we realize now in medicine is the importance of community. and in life, the importance of community. And when people were cut off, I was watching seniors not be able to see someone's face for months at a time. They never, they would drop the food off and leave, and they never saw another person. They were just in the room for months and months and months on end. And even doing a Zoom meeting like this was such a, I had patients crying because they were so happy to see a human face.
Oh, yes. And when we started we called them speakeasies, where we would have outdoor events, and it was mass choice, and we would invite out of work musicians. We would invite small businesses to have booths so they could sell their products and make a living. And it was just amazing. People would say things to me like, you know what? I haven't even spoken to anyone in person in 3 months, and they felt overwhelmed by emotion.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And we were calling that. I mean, those of us in medicine were seeing the effects, the impact of increased alcohol use and, spousal abuse, all these things just being contained with people. I mean, all of us who've had family members visit us, we know after a little while and Amy, don't worry, we love to have dogs in the background here. If I was home, I'd be
Okay.
having mine. So people who don't know, I trapped Amy early in the morning at 7 o'clock my time. So this shows how dedicated she is to get on this little podcast to get the word out a little bit. But you know, on the run, trying to it's busy campaigning and running around doing all this craziness as a mom. And so also tell people who don't know your background of what your career background was before going into running for supervisor.
Well, that's where my past experience as a state licensed private investigator, I've had my license in California since 1999, really kicked in, because I went from, and I'll tell this story real quick. It's really important to why I started getting involved. So I remember when beaches were reopened here in California, and I decided to take my then 9-year-old to the beach, and he was so happy, and he was in the ocean, and I plopped down on the sand. And that's when a lifeguard came up to me and he said, "You can't sit here." That's when you were not allowed to sit on the beach. And he said, "You can go down the shore where I can't see you." And I said, "Well, if I go down the shore where you can't see me, then you can't see my son." And so I stood there in the sand for 90 minutes doing a dance side to side so I could comply. And that's when 2 weeks later, when 3 buildings were burned down in La Mesa, and again, our public health officials went from the beach will kill you to it's okay to protest and riot. And that's when I vowed I will never dance for the government in the sand ever again. And so as a state licensed investigator, I couldn't trust what the mainstream media was putting out. And so I started attending what was then online San Diego County Board of Supervisors press conferences with our chief medical officer and the reports. And I started noticing that things just weren't adding up. And so my very first step into activism was just posting on my Facebook, "Hey, the county is saying this, but this isn't true." And then I would put state licensed private investigator number 21006. And that was my way of saying I have triple fact checked it. And so with that, then people started following me on Facebook. Also, people started unfriending me and blocking me who were my friends. So it was a terrible time, but it was also a time of great awakening where like-minded people in the community came together to support one another when there was so much division going on.
And you told me a story about like when you really realized what your calling was, you had a epiphany or a moment with God. Like tell people about that, because a lot of my patients, we talk a lot about faith and about what motivates us, where do we go when everything goes dark, those kind of things. So what happened where you kind of said, okay, I'm called to do this thing?
Well, when 3 buildings burned down just 2 miles away from here, I went out the next morning because it was where the fires were near where I was attending church, and went out there with people and we started cleaning up the community. And it just didn't end there. We were, the National Guard came to La Mesa for the first time in our history. And we were under nightly curfew at 6:30 every single night. We had helicopters beating over our heads. And I remember 2 weeks later, after all that had happened, just being in total disbelief what had just taken place, that I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, and I was starting to feel depressed about what was going on in California. But I immediately put an emotion on that. It was more than depression. It was a feeling of powerlessness. And then I remember like this flash of this image of me, but 25 years from now. And this me 25 years from now was looking back at me now saying, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you stand up? And then the second image that I saw was me, 18 years old in 1986, looking at me now, just going, I thought when it would count that you would stand up, that you would do something. And I literally stood in the middle of my kitchen and I said, okay, God, I know I'm supposed to do something. I just don't know what. Show me what to do. And again, the rest is history. I co-founded Reopen San Diego. We later went on to successfully keep vaccine passports out of San Diego County by building up a small business coalition of 300 businesses that displayed signs on their windows saying they wouldn't discriminate. We had a series of rallies called Protect the Protectors because 350 San Diego police officers came to us and said, the mayor is about to fire us 3 weeks before Christmas and not offer us a religious exemption. Can you help us do a press conference? So we did a series of press conferences and rallies called Protect the Protectors with thousands of people. And we saved over 1,000 first responders, unlike New York, unlike Los Angeles, where they were fired.
Well, and also relevant to that is now New York just said, hey, we got to rehire back all these people with back pay because it's unconstitutional what they did. And a lot of us argued that, I mean, as doctors, as you know, in California, one of their First Amendment violations, if we say, hey, here's how I see it, here's the facts as I see them. And I think that's a huge issue. And I think part of Reopen San Diego, when I saw what you were doing, I was really excited because you were following the real science. You were really looking at saying, okay, you can't just shut down outside dining without any data. I mean, if you're going to shut down things or make a drastic change in humanity, they're going to affect millions of lives. Shouldn't you have data to say, yes, it's a 95% decrease in risk, whatever. They never had data on those things.
Yeah. And I remember when I would find there would be little drips of truth that would come from the Washington Post or the New York Times. And they did say that there was a CDC, World Health Organization study about outdoor transmission not being a thing. And I remember just blasting that out because that's sometimes if you're dealing with people, and it's sad how political lockdowns and mass choice and vaccine choice became. So when you're dealing with somebody maybe on the left, providing them with a news story from sources that they read is very helpful. They're more open to that, and that's what we did. The other thing that we did was, so things got darker in San Diego, even after we were successful in saving those 1,000 first responders. The city of San Diego passed an ordinance saying that if you're not vaccinated, you can't hold elected office. You can't volunteer for the city. You can't serve on a board or commission. And we appealed to them. Our attorneys wrote the city letters to try to get them to repeal it. We tried to fight it, and it just fell on deaf ears. So we had no other choice. We had to file in federal court. So right now, Reopen San Diego has a federal lawsuit against the city of San Diego, and that's still pending. So what's going on in New York right now with these court decisions absolutely help us and help our case.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I've noticed, the good thing I've noticed is the sense of community. Right after you were having we're in Santee, we're neighbors. So right when you were having the protests, mostly peaceful, I guess, in La Mesa, despite burning down banks and all those kind of things, Santee they had an uprising too, and then all these citizens got together and they right across the street here actually stood against between the business and these rioters and said, look, you're gonna have to go through us. We don't want to fight with you. We don't want to, and it de-escalated the situation instead of just letting chaos happen. And I happen to have Mayor Wells on from El Cajon, who really fought hard to open up. He looked at the data too, and I had him on the podcast. And I as a doctor, I didn't know this data, and this is probably almost a year ago, maybe. And he said, "Do you know the number one killer of adults between 18 and 45? It's this fentanyl overdose." And I was like, wow, as a doctor, I didn't know that. And I was blown away. I said, are you sure? Let me double check you on this. And I double checked and it was correct. And obviously now we know that's the truth. And so I think there's all these what we would call collateral damage that happened. And a lot of us were seeing it in real time. And you standing up gave me hope in San Diego, saying, okay, maybe we're not going to be like LA and San Francisco and lock everyone down and shut down businesses and cause the disasters that we're seeing there.
We fought so hard, and we had a historic moment where we brought hundreds of people. And this was in August of last year to the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, where we testified, and we kept our Board of Supervisors up until midnight. And it was a couple of days later, and I have an inside source at the County of San Diego who works on the COVID task force team, actually. And they were quite shaken by that historic flood of people that came in. Turns out the county had a plan. They were going to do mandatory mask mandates. They were going to do mandatory COVID vaccines for private employers. And they were also going to do countywide vaccine passports. They withdrew it because we showed up and we said, no, not here. It's not going to happen in San Diego.
Yeah, I think that really shows the grassroots of you saying, look, now 25 years from now, you can look back and say, I stood up and did the right thing. And for me, it's a hard thing because, doctors are so fearful. They'll tell me one thing behind the scenes, but they will not talk publicly, and I know when Dr. Youngblood and some other people were testifying, it was amazing because they had the facts and the data, and I was blown away by what they were showing. And they got no respect from the supervisors who have no medical training at all.
That's exactly right. It's really shocking how my opponent, I am running Nathan Fletcher, who is the current chair of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, and he completely used the lockdowns to gain political power. It was his pathway to power. And what we've seen is people taking the day off to go speak to the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, because you never know when the item is going to come up and you'll have your 2 minutes. So you have to check in the morning and just wait for your turn. Sometimes you show up at 9 o'clock and you don't get to speak until 4. And so you speak your 2 minutes, and my opponent wouldn't even look people in the eye. Instead, he was just playing with his phone. And as we found out, he was mean tweeting about his own constituents, calling his own constituents conspiracy theorists, anti-science, right-wingers, just because they wanted reopening of schools, and calling them stupid. And that's just wrong.
Yeah, it's such a hard pill to swallow, it really is. When we elect people to represent us and they have no interest in representing us, is more moving up the power chain and grabbing more power. And it's a hard thing. That's kind of why, politics to me has been I've stayed out of it, just watching how people get dragged through the mud and all the terrible stuff they dredge up, or they say things that are not, they use out of context, or they really, it's just amazing how people can attack their constituents and then come back and ask for their vote again.
And that was probably the biggest learning lesson I had in all of this, because it is a big deal, unfortunately. And you know what it's like, doctor, to be canceled. You've been canceled twice. And for me, just as a private citizen speaking out on my own Facebook, I remember getting attacked by people maybe I went to high school with, and you feel it. It feels like a body blow when people call you names, selfish, that you're a murderer, people calling you a Nazi. I had a bat mitzvah in 1982, so my rabbi would be really shocked to find out that a Nazi. My 80-year-old Jewish mother would be very shocked. It's just ridiculous, the names that they call you. And so that was the whole point of it. I think it really grew me as a person, that I got attacked, and you feel it as a body blow, but then you go, huh, I survived. I didn't die. And then you just move on from it, instead of maybe 10 years ago, I would have just kind of stewed in it. I gave my heart to Christ in my 30s, and I worked in church ministry for 10 years. And I believe that it's God that gives us strength to overcome and be our protector and our shield when we're attacked. And when we're reminded of that, it's just so much easier to have to deal with those rocks that are being thrown at you.
Yeah, I think when you keep the perspective, when you know that it's worth it, because I honestly think a lot about this. A lot of doctors who I know personally, and they're good people, they don't speak out because they're afraid. And it's like, what are you gonna tell your grandkids in 25, 20 years? Yeah, I just hid in the closet. I didn't say anything when I knew bad stuff was happening. You went the lockdowns and the ramifications that we're seeing, and we knew it was coming. I mean, a lot of us doctors were saying, hey guys, look, we can't fear one thing that's going to cause us to go into absolute devastation. When you look at the streets, even downtown San Diego now, but if you look at LA and San Francisco, what's happening where the good law-abiding citizens are afraid to go outside, they're stepping on needles, there's feces on their front door, the store owners have to go and clean up stuff for an hour before they can open their shop. And you think, gosh darn it, well, I mean, how do people not say, hey, we need to make some changes here?
I think because people are afraid. Uh, there's something that has happened specifically in the past 10 years, that if you disagree with one side, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a Nazi, you're an extremist. And people just shut down. The average person just shuts down. They don't know how to respond. And what I've learned is you absolutely have to reject that premise. You can't let people get away with calling you those names. You have to say, I absolutely reject your premise. You don't have to make excuses. You don't have to go into, oh, I'm not a racist because, I have this friend or that friend, or no, don't even buy into their premise. You must reject it. And you must say to them, look, I want to have a conversation with you. And when you say things to me like I'm a racist, or I'm a homophobe, or I'm an extremist, or I'm a Nazi because I want to reopen schools, that's you trying to shut down the conversation. Let's have a conversation.
Well, I think out of that, I think a lot of people were the fear, and if you said anything against what they thought was the solution, then you're taking away their hope. Instead of saying, hey, here's the reality of what we're seeing. My job is to look at the data and assess risk and benefit for each patient in front of me. I can't just say, okay, this is good for everyone, or no, this is bad for everyone. I have to say, look, in your situation, like yesterday, I just tweeted something about this saying, look, if there's a fire in your building, the physician's role is to say, okay, how big is the fire? And also let you know what floor you're on. If you're on the first floor, maybe you'll jump out the window and that would be a good solution. If you're in the 34th floor, maybe not a good idea, right? So you start looking, especially if it's just a little fire in the kitchen. Like if it's a huge, massive fire, then you got to make your own decision. But that's what I've really believed, and I think something that you said that really resonated is that sometimes we have to be backed into the corner to see how strong we are, and we have to be attacked to see what we really do believe and what we really do value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, for me, again, 2020 was the key that unlocked my life. I literally woke up in every single way, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It was amazing. I was 50 pounds heavier than I am right now in 2020. And when you stand up and you speak the truth and you're not afraid, it is transformational. It will change your,
Wow.
guarantee it. Yes, it'll be hard, but it's worth it because it is hard. And I I, I will never regret standing up and speaking up for what's right.
No, so you had to tell us this, since we're interested in this stuff too. So how do you lose 50 pounds during COVID? Everyone else gained at least 20 or 30 pounds on average. Was it stress? Was it just focusing on getting healthy so you could fight this fight? Or what motivated you to make those changes?
Okay, I'm just going to be really transparent and really real because I think it'll help somebody. So here I was, and I was on the news for the very first time, and my son was with me on the news, and I was so excited. And I watched the clip, and I looked at myself, and I go, that's not me. I realized I finally had a truthful mirror in front of me about what kind of shape I was in. I was nearly 180 pounds. And in my mind, though, I was carrying it well. And so that's when I just ruthlessly started cutting out. And let me just tell you, once you have that aha moment, there are different paths that you can take to get in shape. So I'm not saying that the way that I did it is the right way. I'm just saying this is what worked for me. I knew that I had to get rid of carbs, that I was addicted to carbs. So no sugar, no rice, no bread. It was a high protein diet. And then when I started having success in losing weight, I had another aha moment. There was a Twitter account that had taken a screenshot of my Facebook, a picture of my son and I. I wasn't even on Twitter at the time. And they posted a picture of myself and my son to a bunch of Antifa accounts. And one of the commenters said, oh, she calls herself a mama bear. I want to punch her in her face. And I just remember thinking, you know what? I need to physically get in shape. And that's when I started walking. And then that walking turned into 3 miles a day, every day, rain or shine, no excuse. And then I guess it's been about 10 months now, the day after Christmas, that's when I started lifting weights 3 times a week. So it's really, really important during these times that we also be physically in shape for what the world is throwing at us.
I think I set you up as a ringer here. I didn't even know it too. I didn't know your story about that. It's funny because my other podcast is called Low Carb MD, and we kind of talk about cutting carbs and getting life back together and all those kind of things. And this podcast was an outspring of that because over there I would talk about faith and hope during the midst of COVID, and people didn't want to hear about that. They go, how can there be hope? There's no hope. Everything's terrible and nothing's going to get better. I was like, there'll be a better day. But when I talked about faith and hope, I said, I'll talk about that stuff on a different podcast so I don't hold you hostage if you just want to hear about low carb. But the reality is stress, how we deal with stress, faith, all these things affect our journey to health.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel bad for people that are rejecting faith or rejecting hope, because if there's one reason and one reason only why I'm sitting here today and I have the honor of connecting with you and being on your show, it is because of God in me. So hopefully this isn't too much for people watching right now, but yes, I do put my hope, my faith, and my trust in Jesus Christ.
Well, I don't think it's too much, especially not for me, but that's one of the things that people say, how can you be a doctor and have faith and hope and all this stuff? And I was like, well, they're not mutually exclusive, and in medicine, there's a lot of faith and hope. I mean, you have to have faith in me. You don't come to me as a doctor unless you believe in what I'm telling you. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, right? We're all wasting our time. So I think that, and I think in our politicians too, when we look at that of, how many people do we truly say this person has my back, or they really do care? And as a matter of fact, I have a good friend who was running some political stuff here in San Diego, and we were on a hike one day, and I said, how many people really, really care that you guys put up for elections? He said, very few, very few. And that's a tragic, that's like being a doctor who doesn't care about your patient. Like if you don't care about your constituents, what the heck are you doing here other than power and prestige and money maybe?
Yes, and that's what we have found. I remember during 2020 and watching our San Diego County Board of Supervisors meetings, we weren't allowed in. We had to watch online, and I would listen to caller after caller, people crying, people saying that they couldn't pay their rent because the restaurant that they worked for was closed and they weren't able to get through to unemployment. And there were single moms that were crying, saying, I had to quit my job and go on food stamps so they could homeschool their 4 kids on Zoom because there was no other person that could do that but them. And that has been the reason why I decided to run this year. I never expected it. Back in January, the district lines were redrawn because every 10 years they do the census and then they redraw the district lines. And I found myself in a new district. And the district that I found myself in was the same guy, the chief lockdowner, the chief insulter, the chief divider here in San Diego County. And I knew in that moment, I remember seeing that. I was like, yes, I'm in. And again, just to be transparent and to encourage people who are thinking about running for office, yes, my next thought was, what if you lose? Then my next thought was, I have nothing to lose. And it's been amazing since January. And yes, I have full-time work that I do. And yes, I'm running for office full-time and still the co-founder of Reopen San Diego. Since January, we've built a volunteer team of over 300 volunteers. I've raised almost $250,000, none of it from special interests or political parties, just regular people who've never donated before. And we've got a movement. And the icing on the cake, just the other day, I had a friend who called me. She was so excited. Amy, you're not going to believe it. And what she told me was on Highway 8 East, the firefighters did a huge billboard with my face on it saying, San Diego local firefighters endorse Amy Reichert. And it's because, again, you know what? When you stand up and you have their back, they're going to have your back too. And I did. I stood up for our firefighters, and wow, just it's overwhelming. Just
Yeah,
so.
and you saved over 1,000 jobs. They would have got terminated. You know, as a matter of fact, where I met you was with Owen, who I actually had on. You know, he got terminated because he made a personal life decision, right? And it turns out to be the right one because, you know, we have new data now saying, okay, you know, like you were mandating things that basically they were using false information for people, right? They didn't have the data. I knew darn well if I didn't have the data, looking for it every day, that other people didn't have magical data that we couldn't evaluate. But these people, like doctors and nurses in town that lost their jobs, their livelihood, they have, you know, I know as a doctor, you know, you come out of school with $400,000-$500,000 worth of debt. You think you're going to say anything? It's suicide politically. And so to see these people who you helped, and I see these small businesses that you helped to reopen or to keep open, because the tragedy, and I have friends who own restaurants, and it was, you know, they open up for a day, they order all this food for all these people that are going to come in, and then they shut them back down within a few days. It's a total disaster. You know, they've already been struggling, and they had to, you know, have 3 people, you know, sitting outside, and oh my goodness, and to see the senselessness of that, and someone just with a swipe of a pen, you know, affects all these lives. It's devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got friends who are restaurant owners. The SD the Village SD restaurant in North Park. If you're a local San Diegan, please check it out. 2611 El Cajon Boulevard. I have to give her a shout out. Alondra Ruiz. She stood up after 2 weeks and she's like, nope, I'm not going to do this shutdown thing. And she defied the governor. And then she became a center for our community, for people who love freedom. And she was attacked repeatedly. People graffitied her business, called her a Nazi, called her a plague rat. I mean, it was vicious and vile. And so, you know what? If wherever you are and wherever you're watching right now, if you know of a local freedom business in your community, please support them for standing up.
Yeah, and I was surprised how many people stood up. Like there were a few here in Santee, El Cajon for sure. You know, you know, because their own mayor was saying, "Hey, look, we're not going after you. We're not gonna pursue." And out of all those cases, and I think you may know this, but according to Mayor Wells, he said all those cases, the people who got fined for keeping their business open, not one paid a dime.
That's right.
It was unconstitutional to start with, and people who understood. And then, you know, the other thing of people of faith is we watched the strip clubs. As a matter of fact, I went by one of my good friends who's doing great work here in San Diego, Jeff Cotterman. I'll give him a shout out while we're at it, from Tri-System Nutrition. He had to close his gym down, and I went and met with him. I remember sitting there like the devastation of, your whole life, everything, your people are getting sick because they can't come work out with you. How do I do this? How do I do it remote? And all those things. But driving to meet with them, I drove by this strip club that was there, and it was full of cars, packed with cars. And the casino stayed open. And so they banded together and they fought it and they won. And I think there were some local San Diego businesses who fought it and won also.
Yeah. And that was, another reason why people started waking up. They're like, wait, a casino can be open, but a church can't be open? Wait a second. A marijuana dispensary, a liquor store, and a strip club can be open, but my local mom and pop shop can't be open? What? It just make it make sense. And that's why people stood up. And then later, of course, this amazing freedom community, we had no choice but to stand up against the vaccine mandates too, when they started coming for us and our kids.
Yeah, and I think that was the big one for me as a doc. I would say, I think we were medical ethics 101 was patient autonomy, where patient can decide if they want to get a treatment. Or we had Nuremberg code saying, hey, look, you can't force or coerce, but everyone was coerced and forced to say, hey, look, you can't run for office unless you have this treatment, right? That is questionable. But the point was, if you have a choice and you want to choose, then okay, you take a risk. People are smoking and they know the downside. They're drinking too much and they know the downside. And if they accept that risk, I can't force them and say, you have to do this. And so whenever there's risk, you have to have choice for that person to say, hey, wait, let me reassess what I'm doing here and see if this is a good option for me, and it's really hard as a doctor, because my job is to discuss the risks and the benefits. I'm called to do that, to say, hey, look, here's the good side, here's the bad side, here's what I don't know. Because people were asking me at the very beginning, hey, what are the long-term ramifications of some? I don't know. We don't have data on that. Here's what people on this side speculate. Here's what these people speculate. This person says it's safe. This person says it's 95% effective. Here's what other data shows. Let's make that decision together. I can't force you to do something. And then I watch people have to choose between their careers or traveling for business, or going to see a foreign country, and to make these difficult decisions. And they were just basically they wanted to make your life so miserable that you had to comply.
And the government misinformation, my opponent was tweeting that the vaccine had a 99.9% efficacy. That's what he tweeted. And yes, I have screenshotted it and I have used it against him. He said, the vaccine has a 99.9% efficacy, so go get a vaccine. And then he used that government misinformation to pass a resolution at the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, which banned people who are not vaccinated from county employment. The County of San Diego is the third largest employer of people in the county. That was huge. People were denied opportunities. Existing employees who were not vaccinated had to undergo mandatory weekly testing. They were bullied, they were shamed, they were discriminated against. Existing county employees were told, you can't transfer to another employee as long as you're not vaccinated, and we can't give you a promotion. These are all things that my opponent did. And thank goodness we kept putting the pressure on the county, and they did rescind that. And right now, you do not have to be vaccinated to work for the County of San Diego, and there's no longer mandatory testing. But unfortunately, that does exist with the city of San Diego, who's just stubborn and refuses to budge, despite the CDC recently coming out and saying that the vaccinated should be treated the same as the unvaccinated.
Well, that's what the hard thing is, when you follow the CDC or you follow the FDA and you start looking at, and they follow them on some things, and then they change what they were doing before, and they don't follow suit again because there's an agenda. And it's a hard thing. It really is. And we've all been accused of crazy stuff. And when you go, look, I'm just looking at the data, and now the data a year or two, what we were saying 2 or 3 years ago now is bearing out, because I've seen it. I mean, I was seeing it in my practice, and you can call me medical misinformation if you want, but I had people that tested positive, negative on subsequent testing. And you look and you go, look, and the problem is the hospitals, they knew this darn well that you're going to get a certain percentage of false positive. There's no test that doesn't have false positives. So if I keep testing you every single day until I get a positive, guess what? My diagnosis code, and I get paid more. So of course I have a vested interest in doing more testing, because sooner or later there's a possibility of getting more false positive. And being on a campus, you know, one basketball player tests positive, then everyone around them gets tested, and then the person never got sick at all, and no one around them got sick because it was a false positive on the first person. So, you know, there's all these things that people just in the lay public didn't understand what we were seeing. And when we spoke about it, they said, "You're crazy. You have no idea. This is the most accurate test." It's not. It wasn't. It just wasn't. And now the CDC and, you know, people are coming around to that fact of saying, "Yeah, maybe we overcalled some things."
Yes, the American public, we were all sold a very simplified version of COVID, of tests, of vaccines, and quite honestly, we were oversold on the vaccine, and it's just so sad. And I have to say, for me, I remember being asked by the media, "Well, don't you think you should do your part and get the vaccine?" And I remember at this time, people were saying that if you didn't get vaccinated, you were unpatriotic, that you were killing your neighbor, that you were killing your grandma. Um, and I remember when the media asked me, "Don't you think you should be doing your part by getting the vaccine?" And I'm like, I have done my part. I lost 50 pounds. We know that a high percentage of people who test positive for COVID are obese. And right now, I'm a healthy 54-year-old woman with no comorbidities. So I have done my part.
You
And
took yourself
that,
from the 34th floor down to the first floor. Now you can make those decisions, right? You know, and
yeah,
that's kind of what, that's where we dropped the ball too. A lot of us were saying that. We said we know who's passing away in the hospital. We knew the numbers, we knew the data. But when you said something, they said, "Well, you're discriminating against people," but it's not. It's what it is. It's like, you could be nice, you know, but our job's to save lives, and to say, "Hey, here's the risk and benefit," and going back to all those things. So, you know, it's amazing. You're sitting around your kitchen table or garage, and all of a sudden, boom, here you are, like changing San Diego. Look how many, I mean, it really is amazing. It just says what common citizens can do when we come together and say, "Okay, look, I have a cause I'm going to fight for," you know, and, you know, like a Rocky story, you come up from nothing and you punch these guys in the nose.
seriously, I mean, once you, if you have a belief that you strongly believe in your very core, and you're willing to enter the arena, and you're willing to fight for those ideals with everything that you have and wrestle with anybody in a civil way too, because I've never done it in a mean-spirited way. You'd be surprised what an average person can do. Oh, and here's the other thing too. The reason why I think, why me? Why was I able to get on TV? And why did Reopen San Diego? Why was our message being able to get out there? Because there were so few voices that were speaking up. Our elected leaders were silent, even the ones that were on our side. And so here's something, whether you have a business or you have a belief that you're passionate about, when you are willing to speak up about things that other people are already thinking in their mind, but they're too afraid in their heart to say, it's powerful. It will change the world.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes one person to stand up and say, "Look, this is craziness. This is what I see. What do you think?" But when you separate people, they can't have a community where you say, "This doesn't make sense." We all said it didn't make sense. Like, where's the data on 6 feet apart? Where's the data on masking? Where is the data to show us, like, is 2 masks better than one? N95 better than cloth mask, or if you're wearing a t-shirt? And so there's definitely differences, and we have to look at the studies and the science and in reality what we're seeing. Because I recall very clearly when they said, "Hey, they're going to reopen up in Texas and Florida," people said they're going to kill half their population will be gone, and it didn't happen. Didn't happen. And so, you know, and even now LA was going to close back down again, and then the numbers dropped right before they were going to close down, because had they have closed down, then they say, "See, we did it again." But we know there's a natural occurrence of these illnesses that go around. Like even yesterday I was watching, and it says, you know, this fear mongering is so crazy that you know, that one of the news companies, a bunch of the news companies actually, because I saw the same things written in 3 different, I like to look at different news just to see what people are saying. And they all said, "Oh, experts are fearful that there's going to be an uptick in colds and flu in the next couple months." Like, Yeah, that's a flu season. We've had that every year since I've been a doctor, and way before I was born. But they're acting like they're like saying, "Oh, Christmas is going to happen this year," or "the sun's going to come up tomorrow." Like they're predicting something that is so amazingly, like Nostradamus here.
Oh, yes. And when you look at the media, I mean, I can get in my car right now because I'm going to be taking my son to school in about 15 minutes. And I'm probably going to hear 3 commercials for COVID vaccines on our way, even on quote unquote conservative radio stations. And here's another thing I don't know if a lot of people have noticed. You will never, ever hear in these commercials the side effects. And that's alarming because previously, before COVID, if they wanted to have a commercial for Viagra or a commercial for Prozac, you'd always hear the disclaimer at the end, may cause sudden death, may cause, high blood pressure, you know, seizures. They always had to do that. But because it's the government that has paid for these vaccines, and because they're paying for this advertising, there's no disclosures. That's alarming. Don't think for 1 second that they're going to stop here. They have laid the foundations with the laws that they've put in place. They're testing these lawsuits to see what works and what doesn't work in the courts. They're going to try to mandate something else in a couple of years. And we have to be strong. We have to rise up against this.
Yeah, I think being strong and standing up and knowing what you believe and saying, okay, look, here's my opinion. I've never been afraid of someone's opinion or may not agree with me, but I don't want to silence their voice. If someone's anti-Christian, okay, let's talk about it. And that's why I did this podcast. So people would say, look, here's how I deal with my life. Let them give their testimony rather than arguing whether scripture is true or not. At some point you go, look, is the proof there? I mean, are we seeing, is a control group better than the treatment group, or what are we seeing in the population? And then we adjust accordingly. We can't just throw our, say this, I'm standing by this no matter what the data shows. At some point you see the data and go, okay, if it shows things are beneficial, you say, okay, this seems like a reasonable thing to do. So I know you got a busy schedule ahead of you. What's life's best medicine for you? Where do you go when things are terrible, when things look dark? I mean, what keeps you going? And I think I kind of know the answer, but I have to ask you that because this is Life's Best Medicine podcast.
Well, you're right. It's my faith, but it's also my family. And again, being very intentional every single day, carving out that time to walk that 3 miles every single day. Wow. I spend time with God during that time. I self-reflect. I'm not on my phone, obviously, when I'm walking. And it clears the day open to have more clarity and a sense of purpose. So I would just say, you know what? Anybody who's watching, put God first and watch the rest, just come in line in your life.
Awesome. And thanks for your courage and standing up. Really, I mean, I just sitting back and watching Reopen San Diego, all the work you were doing, and I do feel bad that I sat back and watched and kind of observed and, watched people like Kelly Victory saying, here's the data. There's a lot of people coming out saying, hey, look, let's not live in fear. And, people who were trying to take the fear away were attacked, which is kind of a crazy idea, that we want to give hope. That's kind of what we're here for. So people love what you're talking about. You're outside my district, so I can't even vote for you. But for those who want to help out or get involved or, track you down or donate to you, how do they find you?
Well, for Reopen San Diego, we are a nonprofit, a 501c3. And yes, we do need help with our federal lawsuit funding. So far, we've spent over $40,000 in attorney's fees fighting the mandate in the city of San Diego. So you can go there to reopensd.org to find out more about Reopen San Diego and how you can contribute. That's reopensd.org. And for my campaign, there's just 13 days left until election day. So you can go to my website, amyforsandiego.com. That's Amy, F-O-R, sandiego.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And Doc, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. No, really, you give me hope. And, I keep looking at some states next to us saying, do I make an exit plan or not? But having people like you in office makes me feel a lot better. I think we need some good people who really care and get it and have their finger on the pulse of what's happening, not just, looking for big political aspiration, but really getting in the fight, and someone like you who's going to get in there and fight for your citizens and people who trusted you, and what you've done for the first responders. I mean, it's such a huge deal. That's why I wanted to have you on, because you're a decent, good person. And I'm surprised by part of your story. I didn't know a lot of that too. So, I think it's really great what you're doing, and just for standing up. And I think just for inspiring people to say, I don't think this is right. Let me stand up and say something rather than just trying to fly under the radar. All of us feel safe by not speaking up, but we need people like you to be the tip of the spear who say, hey, look, there's something wrong going on. We have to stand up. And when you can't, have your kid swim safely in the middle of the ocean, and the lifeguard wants you to go out of their sight of view when they're supposed to be protecting you, just to appease whoever, it is tragic. And I think people are going to look back, and right now, no one is owning it. And like all these big leaders in public health, everyone's saying, well, I didn't recommend locking down. I didn't recommend closing the schools. They're starting to realize that people are catching on and saying, hey, look, let's look at the risk and benefit. We're putting our kids at risk. No one's going to put their own kid at risk, intentionally. And, and so what you're doing is so huge. And I just want to thank you for that. And hey, everyone, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, step up when you need to. You can't just fly under the radar. Don't be like Amy would be in 25 years looking back, say, gosh, if only I would have said something. So Amy, have a great weekend. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.